Oh, the damage we can do, wreaking havoc and destruction. Bomberman will never know what hit him. I love you. I love you. I love you.
Bomberman! No, not that guy. Jesus, no.
Oh my fucking lord.
No! Bomberman! This guy. He's super cute, super cool, has way more games than even casual fans can fathom. Overall, he's an iconic video game character. Why am I talking about him in this Wario video, though? Well, let's talk about how fast and loose companies used to be with localization. There's some pretty nutty examples like Bugs Bunny's Crazy Castle 2 just being Mickey Mouse 2 in Japan, some weird demon thing named Hugo in Europe, while probably causing modern copyright lawyers to go cross-eyed were essentially just basic asset flips. You know, Bugs Bunny is now the iconic Hugo. There's other much more famous examples like Doki Doki Panic being used as a quick replacement for lost levels as America's true Super Mario Bros. 2. What most people never bother to mention though with this factoid is that they made pretty huge improvements when duct taping Mario characters over the Doki Doki Panic ones. They polished up the game and its graphics. In Mario 2 USA they don't force you to finish the level with every single character like in Doki Doki, which is just essentially dragging the game out to an insane degree. Subtle foreshadowing for later on. Speaking of dragging out, you can't even run in Doki Doki Panic. Honestly, playing it for any reason outside of historical curiosity makes it feel like a beta for Mario 2. Even though they did make these changes though, it was essentially localizing a random Japanese game and pretending it was a sequel to one of the biggest and most recognizable games of all time to this day. So that being said, I feel it's a much smaller pill to swallow when I tell you that Wario Blast featuring Bomberman was never really a Wario game at all. It was a game called, get this, Bomberman Game Boy, or Bomberman GB. If anything, it should be called Bomberman GB featuring Wario, but Wario's raw star power plays second fiddle to no one. He was hot off the presses as being hailed as the second best game of 1994 by Nintendo Power in issue 98, or 68, one of those two, and selling pretty damn well to match. Seeing the sudden explosion of his popularity, they must have thought Bomberman just wasn't on his level, not enough to sell copies at least, and decided the game needed a little help from a fat, mustachioed man. According to Norio Okubo, the lead game and graphic designer and director of Wario Blast, which, you know, he directed the original Bomberman GB, is what that means. He stated they originally were considering using Mario, like to ask Nintendo to use Mario, but the reason they went with Wario is because Mario seems like too much of a pansy to be throwing bombs, you know? Of course, I think I'm paraphrasing, but I know how to read between the lines with people. Okubo mentioned that working with Nintendo's characters was pretty intense, receiving a list of stuff that wasn't allowed to do with their characters. He likened their approval process to something like working with a Disney character. Which kind of reminds me how in Disney's Wreck-It Ralph, everyone's companies for their characters was telling them specific ways that their characters would move and react. I think they even had a specific way for how, like, Bowser was supposed to hold his little coffee cup and Sonic getting hit by, like, an object and, you know, falling backward with his rings. Anyway, all of this, you know, all of these limitations were very different from working on the original untouched Japanese Bomberman GB, to which him and the team felt completely free to add in whatever personal touches and visuals they wanted. Still, Okubo looks back working on the game fondly, and mentions it was an honor to work on it even after leaving the industry. The choice to put in a Nintendo character seems to have paid off, because in that same issue of Nintendo Power, only 2 spots down from Wario Land is Wario Blast, selling very well and managing to land a name drop in their best games list. Still, poor Bomberman. I have an affinity for the little dude. Like I mentioned before, his design is insanely memorable and iconic. It's equal parts cool and cute, kind of like Sonic and Klonoa. You think of them as these radical dudes as a kid. When you grow up, you realize that they're also pretty adorable and marketable. I ain't dogging on that though. I love toys and merch, and I have some of Bomberman too. He's a fun dude. and he was pretty popular on the SNES with his first 2 Bomberman, like Super Bomberman entries. He's also a staple for local multiplayer fun, like grab almost any copy of a Bomberman game and there's more than likely an option to play some classic multiplayer Bomberman on said game. It's kind of like when Namco includes Pac-Man, Galaga, and Dig Dug in a game. It's not even a novelty anymore, it's just expected. While he was a successful mascot though, I mentioned feeling bad for him because it seems like companies always failed to realize or properly execute his popularity, at least at first. When first bringing him over into portable game form on Game Boy, they called him Dyna Blaster in Europe and the Atomic Punk in North America. What's even more confusing is that they pulled that Final Fantasy III shit and called Bomberman GB2 from Japan just Bomberman GB here. All this shit drives my autistic little mind insane, but at least they've cooled it with this kind of shit nowadays. It's too much access to other countries through the internet, so they can't really get away with just renaming things and tricking everybody. Well, pity party for Bomberman aside, yeah, this is essentially just a reskin of Bomberman GB. I did get the game physically and played it on a Super Game Boy, Wario Blast, not Bomberman GB. But since I'm not Japanese, I played Bomberman GB on the MGBA emulator. I did want to venture out into the world to see how worthwhile the game is during bus rides or waiting for appointments, but I don't leave my house. And I'm not about to start now, not even for dear Wario. Well, seeing as I'm definitely not going outside, all I'll mention is that everything's easily identifiable and playable on a Game Boy. Alright, and to start off, I'll quickly mention the story. Wario was apparently just traveling around, looking for holy places full of treasure to desecrate and plunder, and apparently just found an interdimensional portal that links his world to Bomberman's? I mean, hey, who hasn't found a portal to another world, right? Happens every day. Mad Bombers, who the manual mentions he wants to add to his legions of minions, even though Wario has never had any sort of minions or slaves, not publicly at least. More fittingly, he sees them as a source of funds, I guess, or schemes. Then finds out that the Mad Bombers are a lot more dangerous than he assumed they'd be. I guess in Bomberman's world, Wario's vulnerability doesn't come along with him. Funnily enough, Wario's entire goal is just to enslave those Mad Bombers and steal as much money and property as he can from Bomberland while he's there. And if you choose to play as Bomberman, his goal is just to stop Wario from doing what he wants to do. So, moving on from the story to the game itself, I finally realized something about Bomberman that I had never realized before. I don't even like classic Bomberman. I've been a big fan of this little dude since I was a kid. I never realized my favorite adventures of him were outliers. Bomberman 64, Bomberman Hero. While I don't like them as much anymore, Bomberman Generations and Bomberman Jetters. And some of the Bomberman Land games too. When it came to playing straight up no bullshit Bomberman, I only played that with a friend or a family member, you know, if somebody was over. And it was definitely really fun and iconic. It's playing that style in single player though, holy shit, is it uninteresting. Which means that Wario Blast, like a lot of classic Bomberman games, wears its gimmicks and fun thin rather quickly, and leads to kind of a plotting experience and results me in wondering when the game is going to end. And any game that makes me want to know when it's gonna end is just like an instant failure to me. Like, let alone a game that like this is beaten in 1 to 2 hours from your first time playing it. Under an hour if you already have Bomber Lad experience. That being the case, I think the only way to go in depth on this game is to go world by world, which comes down to the computer opponents and the story mode's length. The game's short, but still feels slow. There are no clever enemy patterns requiring you to learn said patterns in order to be able to trap your enemies or goad them into an explosion. There's no consistent aggression or hesitation from them that you can capitalize on to run risky missions on the enemy AI in a big chain explosion event. I mean, look at the portable Frogger games, the enemy patterns are the main challenge. They have routine movements that require dexterity and pattern recognition, resulting in satisfaction when you get past them. In Wario Blast, enemies are the main point of the game too, but even though that's the case, these enemies are so random that it almost makes them pointless. They lazily walk around, sometimes they walk toward you, sometimes they decide to kill themselves, it's all up to luck really. There's very few guarantees in what they'll do. If you go up to them, they'll instantly drop a bomb and walk away. If there are bombs to set down, they'll waddle back and forth between safety and death. And it's a gamble if they fuck up or not. Their worst consistent trait of all, though, is if there's portals. They will literally never fucking stop. teleporting every single fucking second of the match until you finally kill them. Sometimes they kick bombs if cornered, but a lot of times they just kind of stand there and accept the sweet embrace of death. It's really dull, man. Especially with the aforementioned warpads that give you way too many iframes when entering and leaving them, leading to both you and enemies abusing the shit out of it. Honestly, the timer in these levels is not that worrisome unless you're in one of these worlds that have the warpads. When the enemies refuse to stop teleporting and you can't get the timing or positioning in place, that's the only moment that the timer starts feeling a lot faster than it usually does. And as much as I dislike those goddamn warpads, I like the idea of what they were going with. Maybe if I play one of the 80, 90, 200,000 classic Bomberman games, one of them will pull off stage gimmicks better. But in this one, the only one really worth mentioning is the warpads. Before you enter a new world, the game gives Wario, or Bomberman depending on who you chose, a warning of what that level gimmick will be, while playing a little cutscene of Wario and Bomberman being chased by each other, kind of like in those little cutscenes in Pac-Man. As for the first world, there's no gimmicks. Its theme is that it is a Bomberman theme. It's Bomberman fodder, breakable dirt blocks, like solid blocks surrounding the stage, and some of those same blocks being permanent, unbreakable fixtures within the stage. It's your standard Bomberman fare, but Wario's there instead. Most of the time your death will be by your own hand. Either you'll absentmindedly get killed by bombs you weren't paying attention to, your sprite was slightly inside of a blast zone, you'll trap yourself into a corner, sometimes walking around in the wrong way just clips you in between two bombs, and it traps you and kills you. I don't know, it's just not very interesting, unfortunately. Like I said before, when fighting against friends or people online, that's where the fun's at. You're playing mind games with your friends or strangers, trying to exploit their habits, and can do petty things like destroying items so neither of you get them. But you can't really do that too much with AI, not to that far of an extent. Wario Blast, as well as Bomberman GB, obviously, just assume I'm talking about both from now on, was one of the only Game Boy games to work with that SNES multi-tap through the Super Game Boy. I mean, like I'm saying, multiplayer really is that important in Bomberman. I mean, look at this awesome little Bomberman themed multi-tap. I really love when peripherals and merch use like the characters' head shapes or their weird bodies as the design of the product. It's like when you see a lot of curvy things just being, he's a circle. It's easy to make merch of him, so it's really fun to me. Anyway, like I was mentioning earlier, like you can be petty and screw over friends by stealing or destroying their items. Said items are also in Wario Blast and are found inside of breakable blocks just like in most Bomberman games. The first one is the Explosion Expander, which increases the range of your bomb blast to like a maximum of 4 spaces on top of the 2 that you already have. The Extra Bomb, which is, self-evident, gives you more bombs, also a maximum of 4. And finally we have this annoying fucking skull. Try to blow up these skull items the second you see them, because they're as insufferable as in any other Bomberman game I've seen them in. They pretty much are like a randomized troll from a Gmod server. You start blinking and get hit with a status effect, to just becoming slow, not being able to lay down bombs, or just straight up fucking dying, a classic troll being killed. Another annoying thing about them is the AI enemies can spread their status effect to you, and vice versa, so you can fuck them over too, but if you're all infected, with not being able to lay down bombs, you're all just kind of waiting for the skull to wear off. So there's not really a big incentive to spread it to them, unless you're slow and then don't want them to catch you. With the exception of that stupid skull, finding items and growing stronger as you blow up and create paths towards your enemies is fun enough. Though, like I mentioned, you can destroy the skull item, that means that all items are destroyable, which results in unending obnoxiousness of enemies destroying items. Almost any time you put a bomb next to a block, an enemy will come around from nowhere, place one right after you, guaranteeing the item will be destroyed before you can have the chance to collect it. Because if you were to collect it, that bomb's gonna blow up and blow you up alongside it. If you do manage to max out on items, you do have to be careful because your explosion radius and the number of bombs you have can definitely end up killing you and the mad bombers at the same time. Like, it's that dangerous. If you do something like this, it does end in a draw, which forces you to just replay the level again. Each world has 3 levels in it, with progressing levels gaining an additional enemy for Wario to blow up. Whoever wins 2 of the 3 matches wins overall and allows you to move on to the next level. After 3 levels, you arrive at a boss stage. Honestly, I kind of like how weird these bosses are. It really fits the Wario vibe, especially considering future bosses he'll be facing. As weird as some of them look, the weirdest one has to be the World 2 boss, which is like a dreidel. Hey, did you know there's a small group of people who consider Wario a racial stereotype? Don't their lives just sound exhausting? Like, imagine going around and seeing racism everywhere, even where it's not. But the less I talk about the Jews in a video about Wario Blast, the better, because I don't think that's what people are here for. Anyway, while I enjoy these weird bosses, they can be really annoying, which you find out right off the bat with the first one. This weird elephant, Anteater Man, boss, he can kill you even if you're on a different layer of the map. The bosses will kill you no matter what if their sprite so much as come close to you. These are instant kills, just like any other damage taken in the game. It can get really annoying having to watch the game over screen, hit continue, and try again. Wario Blast has both endless continues and a password system for every single level. So what even is the point of a game over? It's just slightly more padding in a game filled to the tits with padding. The lack of punishment for dying just makes the game feel like a battle of attrition, turning it into a game of throwing Wario bodies at levels and bosses until you finally win. Still, the bosses are the highlights of the game because they at least have a semblance of patterns. This weird teddy bear, pissed off flower, is that a flying spaghetti monster? Oh, apparently it's supposed to be a thundercloud. Sure, whatever you say, Wario Blast. Some cauliflower, a knight, and a giant military death plane with Bomberman's head glued to the top of it. Most of these have similar patterns. They send out tiny minions to attack you, and when they're doing so, they are open to damage. Any other time, they are invulnerable. What does change is their openings and how they approach you. The spaghetti monster, for instance, can float over all blocks, which is a lot more stressful than the anteater in the teacup, who kind of just hovers on the top half of the level, never approaching you. They're fun breaks in the tedium of the main levels. One boss in particular really got under my skin, but I'll save that for later. Probably at the end, actually, but right now, I want to bring up the worlds that precede these bosses. As soon as the second world, you will encounter those goddamn warp pads that they call warp holes. Which I thought those are called portals, but if they're holes, but whatever. At the end of the first world, after beating the first boss, you're blessed with the restoration of lifting your legs far enough to kick bombs. All you have to do is walk into any placed bomb and it will kick it across the stage, only stopping when it hits a wall or if you stop it yourself with a B button. Weirdly enough, the kick ability is almost worthless in the world they introduce it in. With all the warp pad shenanigans and the level layout in general, World 2 just doesn't really want you to use the kick. It's all about timing the placements around warp pads. If you kick any bombs at the AI, it'll just run to a portal for iframes. The world's theme is really weird too. It's called Warp Zone in the manual, but the Super Game Boy's color scheme choice kind of makes it look like the lower decks of a galleon. The boxes and oil drums, though, make you assume that it's some sort of explosive warehouse without the colors. At the end of this world, you gain the Dashin ability. It's a run button. It kind of lets you fuck the computers a little harder, but excessive use of it will result in your own death fairly often, so try and use it thoughtfully. I didn't. I don't mind dying a lot in games. After that world, the ground will be covered in little circular pads with arrows on them. By now, you'll have the kick ability I talked about before, and when you kick those bombs into those arrows, it sends the bomb flying into that direction. The idea is that the pads can either help or hurt you. You can plan out the timing of a bomb and where you think a mad bomber will be and send the bomb toward them with the pads. Or you can miscalculate and send the bomb right back to yourself and kill you. In execution, though, the pads don't really play that much of a role in the world. They're kind of just there. The computer's always ready to be killed in the same old ways, via suicide, or you catching them off guard in a corner somewhere. As for the world's theme, in this one it kind of looks like if Clu Land had a bunch of weird stumps all over the ground. Unfortunately, you do not get to swing around on the poles like a stripper, though I guess that is for the best. I doubt they have any fire hydrant-sized stripper poles that could support Wario's weight, and I wouldn't want him hurting himself. This world in particular has a really fun song playing over it. Most of the game in general has pretty cheery little tunes which are taken directly from Bomberman GB, so I guess I didn't really have any time to find a gaseous man to fart into a Game Boy sound chip for a more fitting Wario game soundtrack. Though every boss does have the same song. I'll talk about stuff being identical later on too when I'm comparing both of the games. But for now, back to World 3. In the manual's description, it's very creatively named the Arrow Zone. It's very lore-heavy stuff I won't delve into, but I'm sure it has something to do with the cryptic ancient ruins on the ground. Okay, World 4 is where the game is essentially destroyed in terms of difficulty when it comes to regular levels. At the end of the previous world, you gain an ability called the Trouncer, which kinda apes Wario's shoulder ram, letting him slam opponents against walls when he dashes into them. They get stunned for a significant amount of time, so if you trounce them into one of the 4 corners of the map, which is extremely easy to do, and place a bomb inside them, since while they're being flown across, you can still walk inside of them, place that bomb there, and they literally will not have enough time to escape it. It's a guaranteed kill. As long as you have more than one, fire extender. The only possible reason not to do this would be like a self-imposed challenge. Self-imposed challenges can be fun. It's the only reason I have like 200 hours in Cuphead. But if that's the only way to make the game fun, that's not good. Also, god fucking damn it, dude. The stupid warp pads are back. It also looks like we're in a construction zone with all these striped caution boards in the city surrounding the level. But I guess not, though. This is a fire zone according to the manual. Why? Who fucking knows? There's no fire anywhere, and I don't really want to decipher the thought process of whoever wrote this manual in less than an hour. At the end of this world, you get the most worthless power-up in the game, the liner. If you double-tap the A button, it drops a line of bombs. Of however many bombs you're able to drop at the time. I guess in very specific situations this could be useful, but I mean spamming bombs in various locations kind of yields better results anyway. Even if you do find it useful, you could just run and shit out the bombs and get the same results, so again, it's the most useless ability. Now we enter the 5th world, which is called Coma Zone. Did Wario get fucking blasted in between worlds and this entire world's a coma dream? That's really weird. I don't know what that's about. And as usual, the manual's name for the zone is just nonsensical. At least I hope so. It's another factory-esque location like World 2, except it has Sonic the Hedgehog jump pads and vents with fumes that come out of grates that paralyze you in place. Is the paralysis gas why they call it Coma Zone? Like, that's a fucking stretch, but it's like more plausible than calling a construction world fire zone. These gas vents in conjunction with all your other abilities let you breeze right past the level, just absolutely decimating enemies. After dealing with the world's boss, you gain your final power-up, the Moto. It's a literal little motorcycle on the cover of the original Japanese cover. And if you thought that the trounce ability put the final nail in this game's coffin, the Moto came to that same coffin and just chained it up and put a giant lock on it. Like, it's fucked. With a Moto, you can just jump across any permanent block as long as there's a space to jump to. You can jump over destroyable squares, but honestly, that doesn't come into play. You have free reign over the world, thus rendering the enemies at Wario's mercy, as it should be. It's also kind of neat seeing Wario on a bike, considering that's such an iconic part of his character in the WarioWare series. But yeah, it's the game's over. At this point, you're just kind of wasting time until you get to the final boss. Seeing as that's the final power-up, and you've gained so many powers that the enemies have been rendered worthless, you assume that you're almost at the end of the game, right? Like World 6 will be the culmination of all your previous gimmicks, and require you to use all your newfound powers. Hell no! There are 3 more worlds to go. Yeah, 3! Ice Zone. I'll let you use your mighty brain power to guess as to what that level gimmick is. Burn Zone, which makes your bombs have a short fuse, thus making them explode slightly faster. There's still no actual fire hazards, just like the Fire Zone had none. Finally, we arrive at World 8. I was beyond bored by this point, in all honesty. I wanted it to be over by World 6. And instead they kind of just copy and pasted level elements and dragged out the game by a few worlds. Do you think playing as both Wario and Bomberman would give kids enough game time, But no, there needed to be more padding, I guess. The 8th world is called Power World because they only had the manual's writer for half an hour and it was time for his lunch break. In this level, there are no more items to collect, making blowing up the stage and fighting enemies even more boring. There's no new gimmicks, no new ways to test your abilities or fighting prowess. You have max bombs and firepower. It is just plow through them and get to the final boss. It's honestly even more pointless than the other 2 worlds. I don't know why they bothered. We've arrived at the end of the game. It reminded me a lot of driving down a really long road during a road trip. Everything kind of looks the same, and for a while you kind of just accept you're in purgatory, You look back, there's nothing but road. You look forward, nothing but road. Unlike those road trips, though, which usually end in some horrific family get-together, this ends in a much preferable fight to the death with that giant fighter jet donning a Bomberman head fixed to the top of it. This boss is by far the most annoying part of this game. Okay, well, it's at least a rock-solid runner-up. my first playthrough, I must have gotten insanely lucky or something. I mean, that happens to all of us, right? My first time playing Dark Souls, I remember walking past the archers in Anor Londo, not ever knowing of their infamy until my subsequent playthroughs. Much like that, I kind of just ran around in the final boss wildly throwing down bombs, watching the boss shed skins until it essentially became only that flying Bomberman head, and then after killing him, I beat the game. Second time though, Jesus tap dancing Christ, was it awful. I tried my no strategy thing, but I couldn't really replicate it. Then, unironically, like a half hour later, maybe 40 minutes, I was still trying to get past the fucker's first phase. He has a ridiculously tiny opening, which only triggers after you destroy a projectile that homes in on you. Usually meaning that by the time that projectile is destroyed, the boss is half the map away with its 1 second opening. Whenever you do manage to figure out you can get an opening hit right away with the liner ability at the start of the match, and randomly placing bombs the second and third phases are pretty pathetic. They both hover around with easily avoidable attacks. After you kill them, the game ends with Wario looking on at that explosion he caused while on his cool motorcycle. Though when it cuts to credits, it's Bomberman, and he's cruising on his motorcycle. And Wario only shows up at the very end of the credits to chase him around. There's not even any text to as if Wario took over the Mad Bomber gang or got any treasure. Is he just stuck in Bomberman's world now? That's kind of weird. I wonder what the ending in Bomberman's route is. As a matter of fact, let's see what the differences are in that route in general. Nothing. Absolutely fucking nothing. It is as shamelessly reskinned as humanly possible. Oh yeah. You might have noticed Bomberman's gameplay is a lot crisper, by the way. That's because my Super Game Boy cartridge sadly crapped out, and it just wasn't playing music anymore. Only a corrupted sounding version of the explosion over complete silence. So from now on, enjoy the 4K Game Boy gameplay. Continuing on, remember how earlier in the video I was referring to the improvements Mario 2 USA made to Doki Doki? There is nothing of the sort here. It is identical, all of it, with the exception being that now you fight Wario and Nega Warios. And no, there's no explanation whatsoever. There's just more Warios because there's more enemies on screen. So deal with it. Deal with it. You don't get an explanation. What's weirder than that, though, is seeing the 3 Warios combine and turn into these non-Wario bosses. I mean, it wasn't all that sensical with the Mad Bombers, but it's even weirder with, like, a singular character like Wario. Like, he is Wario. There's not a race of Warios. Oh god, let's not get back to those Jew jokes, but yeah, there's no race of Warios. Bombermen, though, they're robots, so it's like them, like, kind of combining parts and shit, transforming into something that only looks like a teddy bear but is made of metal or something. That's not that weird. And after telling you that, yeah, that's it for Wario Blast. I mean, again, the route is identical, the layouts don't change, nor do the gimmicks or the order you get power-ups, nothing. And no, not even the ending changes. As disappointing as that is, there must be at least some differences between Wario Blast and the original Bomberman GB from Japan, right? Well, sorta. You see this border that, like, appears when you put the cartridge into your Super Game Boy? Look here. Hey, there you go. See, Wario replaces a blue Bomberman in the Wario Blast cartridge. Neat, huh? Oh yeah, and there's a small cutscene at the beginning of the game in Bomberman GB with some Japanese writing on it. It's just a tiny story about Bomberman being attacked by Black Bomberman and his goons, who take all of Bomberman's abilities. I genuinely can't imagine getting jumped so hard. You forget how to read and write and like walk and shit. But whatever, that's Bomberman's world. It's not for me to judge. After waking up off-screen in the ICU, the whole goal of the game for Bomberman is just to get his abilities back and beat up Black Bomberman because, according to Japan, White Bomberman is the good Bomberman, the black one is the bad one, that's it. Man, this review has a lot more social commentary than I thought there'd be in it. I mean, it's Wario Blast. As always, though, Wario's pure, blatant greed is a much more respectable and interesting motivation for going on an adventure. Outside of that, identical games. The music's the same, the visuals are the same, the world order, like I mentioned before, the layouts, the ability retrievals, the final boss is the same. I mean, shit, how hard would it have been to put a big Wario head on the big, like, Apache helicopter in the Bomberman route in Wario Blast? You know, how hard could that have been? I feel if you're gonna reskin a game for it to sell better, the least you can do is actually reskin it, you know, change a couple things more than just like 2 or 3 sprites. Even the passwords are the same, man. Speaking of passwords, there was like an Easter egg in World 7, and it's a special secret password that the game tells you to look out for, which I call total fucking bullshit on. Even looking at the map on its own, you can't decipher any numbers. In game, everyone's blowing shit up immediately, so there's no way to tell if the destructible blocks helped form the numbers. Only from online research would I have known that 5656 leads you to a battle mode as Bomberman, which is literally just an endless waves of enemies to kill for a high score. You do have all your abilities and are powered up, so you can instantly and endlessly body slam enemies into the corner and blow them up until you get bored. The only difference in Wario Blast is that you have to enter 6565 to play as Wario instead of Bomberman. I'm gonna be honest though, I only got through like World 2, like some of World 3 of Bomberman GB before my eyes started glazing, and I just looked it up on YouTube to check for differences at that point. I was already so tired of Wario Blast, I couldn't bring myself to finish it a third time. For a small moment I thought the AI was harder in the Japanese version, but then they started killing themselves as usual and realized I'm reviewing Wario games and having fun with videos. I don't need to dredge through over 10 hours of Wario Blast, you know, I'm good with the 8 I already have. I already torture myself every Sunday, I don't need to add time I spend on these videos to my self-abuse time total. Honestly, it kind of feels weird having a negative tone in a video about Wario. I mean, the man's perfect. It's hard to believe he has a stain on his record, but my experiences with Wario Blast remind me that no one is infallible, not even Wario. It's just a middling Bomberman game, one of dozens and dozens and dozens. A short 20-minute experience stretched out like taffy to make you feel like you didn't waste that much money. The game isn't awful, and it might be fun if it's your first Bomberman experience, but as a Wario game? Nah. It's not really worth checking out even at all. Like most classic Bomberman games, this game would not be as highly rated without its multiplayer. That's what Bomberman's purpose always feels like I mentioned so many times before. I wish I could tell you what the multiplayer is like, but my childhood memories are kind of foggy, and my banana peel friend tortures himself alongside me on Sundays, only appears to me on Sundays, and I don't have anyone else, so I'll just assume it's about as fun as any other multiplayer Bomberman game, which again is pretty fun. Though I would divide that fun by the amount of the screen crunch the Super Game Boy version has. I'd say just buy one of those Super Bomberman games. I mean, why wouldn't you? It doesn't have screen crunch, it has actual colors and not facsimiles of them. Yeah, and there goes an interesting little footnote in the history of Wario. I mentioned in my Virtual Boy Wario Land review that Wario gained an affiliation with bombs after this game. It became a part of his logo. There are bombs used against Wario in Wario's Woods, and spin-off games like Mario Party or Mario Tennis. A special item in Mario Kart Double Dash was a Bob Bomb. I mean, it just stuck with the man. Eventually, Wario's passing interest in terrorism subsided, but it still lingers within him somewhere. And where it lives on is in the WarioWare series, serving as the main logo and the timer for the minigame, being a bomb with Wario's mustache on it. All that being said, we can bring this weird little game to a close. I think next up I might try to do something non-Wario related. I did manage to snag myself a complete box set of Mario and Wario for the Super Famicom, like with the mouse and everything. It's really cool, and all I need to make work on my SNES is a Super Famicom adapter, and those are pretty cheap, surprisingly, so I'll probably look at that next time I do talk about Wario. If you watched till the end, you're probably one of my friends, so thank you. I really appreciate it if you're a stranger as well. It's fun knowing people enjoy videos you make just for fun, you know? And if you have fond memories of Wario Blast, I don't really hold anything against you. I don't think you're like a dumb person. We're all entitled to our wrong opinions, you know? I mean, look at me, I think a lot of 3D Sonic the Hedgehog games are pretty good, you know? No one is really that much better than anyone else. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look at Bomberman GB, also known as Wario Blast. Have a good rest of your day or night or whatever. Try not to doom scroll or stay up too late. And see you next time.